Hi there, and welcome to this edition of What You Need to Know, a Canadian Policast. I'm Alyson Fair, a consultant here at Blue Sky Strategy Group, and as always, I have the pleasure of being joined by my colleagues, Susan Smith, Mike Blanchfield, and Neil Brodie, who has the gorgeous outdoor background. So jealous.
Get it while you last.
That's true. That is true. I wanted to this month talk about, everyone has been seeing Chrystia Freeland, our Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister, kind of doing a roadshow. Mike, you've been watching these speeches intently. She spoke in Washington, she spoke in Gatineau, she spoke in Windsor. What do you make about her speeches? Are they signaling an overall shift in the government's policy when it comes to energy, trade, environment?
I think she's trying to set the table for, sort of future bad news. And she's trying to set the table that things are only going to get worse in the economy and that it's not the Liberals' fault. She's basically saying it's the end of spending as we know it. And she's blaming Vladimir Putin for that and the invasion of Russia because Pierre Poilievre is blaming Justin Trudeau right now.
That's inflation.
So that's right. So she's traveling. So she's basically trying to manage expectations ahead of a fall economic statement, ahead of other bad news, ahead of perhaps the Bank of Canada hitting us again with another rate increase.
Susan, is she? I love how you've mentioned this in conversation. Has she been freelancing during these speeches?
I don't think so. I think there may have been a few surprises. I understand that her speech to the Brookings Institute in Washington, where she talked about spending some domestic capital and domestic political capital to deal with the energy crisis that Europe is facing and perhaps even some of the food crisis that the rest of the world is facing as a result of the Russian invasion on Ukraine. I don't know if that was a bit of a surprise to some people. Some people are talking about the Freeland Doctrine and a new world order with regards to trade. But more importantly, is the speech that you're referring to right from the get-go this week, the speech she gave in Windsor, where I agree with Mike. She is trying to set the table. Inflation is high in G7 countries around the world. We're not suffering quite like the US is. Chrystia Freeland is not at the head of lettuce that Liz Truss has been this week. They've got 10% inflation. We're at 6.9. But inflation isn't over yet. And so the Prime Minister, we've just had the pandemic where when people, when things were shut down, the government stepped in with CERB and other small business supports and wage subsidies for businesses to keep the economy going. Now the economy is moving, but it's not the government's job to set in when there is economic fluctuation. They will be there to help people who are really in tight, whether it's with GST credits and with rent subsidies for people at the lowest income levels. But basically what Minister Freeland said is, people are going to have to adjust. This is what the economy is. There will be people that are unhappy about that. I would think the Conservatives would say, good, that's what you're supposed to do. But it's going to be an interesting fall, and it'll be interesting to see how Canadians, after kind of 2.5 years of government doing everything for them, are going to remember that they're supposed to do a few things for themselves.
Yeah, and you talk about what her content in that speech. I just want to say, before I go to you, Neil, she did have a quote. She said, our economy is slow. There'll be people whose mortgages rates will rise. Businesses will no longer be booming. Our employment rate will no longer be at its record low. That's going to be the case here in Canada. It'll be the case in the United States, and it'll be the case in economies big and small around the world. Neil, she says that there are still some difficult days ahead for Canada's economy. Do you think the Conservatives will say otherwise?
Well, I think it's a long way from budgets will balance themselves, or you'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy or inflation as transitory. The old adage, chickens will come home to roost. The chickens are coming home to roost. Mr. Trudeau was given an economy in 2015 that was running fairly smoothly. Government expenditures were relatively balanced to government revenues. So the deficit, you can argue whether it was $1 billion deficit or $1 billion surplus, but he got handed a pretty good script to run with. but he decided in 2015 for 5 years to run deficits. Potentially, he should have, tightened his belt back in 2015 and prepare for rough seas ahead, because they always come.
Come on, Neil. We couldn't protect a pandemic, and he was elected saying that he was elected in 2015 saying that there would be deficits because we had to invest in infrastructure. That's not a surprise. Maybe the size of the deficits were a surprise, but that isn't a surprise. Canadians made that choice. That was the big shocker. That was the big differential.
The largest expenditure during the pandemic was CERB, and that was $2,000 to let people sit at home and do nothing. Perhaps they could have given them $2,000, $3,000 a month to sit at home and retrain or get an education, and then we'd be prepared today for a workforce of the future, and that would then be an investment. Mr. Trudeau likes to talk about investments. Finance ministers like to talk about investments. Giving people $2,000 a month to sit at home is not an investment. That's just giving people $2,000 a month to sit at home. So the chickens have come home to roost. In the Harper government, they came home to roost a bit in 2008, and we saw from 2011 to 2015 cuts happening. So I expect starting next budget, the Liberals will call it something other than cuts. They'll call it fiscal restraint, or a little bit of pain for a little bit of gain. I don't know what their communications people will call it. But I expect the fall economic statement to be an eye opener and a prelude for the budget.
So, Mike, we've seen. I mean, you and I are part of the nonpartisans here, and we've seen the back and forth that we have been seeing in the House of Commons lately between the new leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister. Do you think this is what we're going to continue to see as we get ready for that fall economic statement? And the type of tone that we've been seeing and hearing from Freeland, is that's what's going to continue, and that what should we be concerned about as we're getting closer to that fall economic statement?
Well, yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I think the battle lines, they're clearly drawn, and it's all in the framing in terms of how the government will frame austerity. That's where we're headed. Call it what you want. And also how they're going to react to the Bank of Canada, which is pretty clearly signaling that we're going to have more rate increases. That's going to hit people's mortgages. It's going to hit us all over the place. And as I said earlier, Freeland is trying to manage that expectation. But she also used this term friendshoring, which is meant to.
Explain what that is, because we're hearing it, but a lot of people don't know what this new term is.
It's basically, it's just a shorthand for we need to be more resilient economically with our allies. To put it as bluntly as possible, it means let's not rely on China as much, even though we have to because it's China. And let's just forget about Russia when it comes to energy, which of course Europe can't. Right. So that's basically, let's make sure we trade with people that are friends for the stuff that's really important, and we're not vulnerable. Well, one of our friends that we need to shore up is Great Britain, and we've seen what's happened there. So, I mean, we have, Canada and UK are in the middle of negotiating a free trade deal because to fill in the gap that when Brexit happened and Britain left the EU, there's a temporary placeholder deal in place right now, but it's arguable as to how much progress will be made to sort of shoring up that trade pillar for Canada. I mean, our government likes going around telling people that, we have free trade deals with everybody, with every G7 partner, with alliances all over Asia, wherever. Well, we're still a little bit short with one G7 partner with the UK right now. We sort of have a deal, but that's kind of hanging, and it's indicative of these global forces that are just smashing Canada around as well.
Yeah, I see you nodding there, Susan. Do you agree? And is this going to affect how companies and our clients in particular are going to have to deal with the government to the end of the year?
I think people in the energy sector, in the oil and gas sector, in the renewable energy sector, there's suddenly a little more opening there for them to deal with the government. And this is what I was talking about when Minister Freeland said we have to use up some domestic capital. I don't think the environmental agenda is going to continue. The commitment to emission reductions and net zero is going to continue. But at the same time, we can't leave our European friends freezing. We don't use Russian oil in Canada. but our European friends do and have, and Russian energy, oil and gas, et cetera. So we've got to find a way to help our friends. And I think that's going to mean a broader perspective, I think, on the application of maybe the speed and the timeline for some of these emissions reductions measures. And I think there's opportunities to incent companies to do more, to stay on the renewable track, to do energy transition and work to reduce their emissions. But I think there are ways government can use mechanism that still enables production, because we have to have it, but maybe it's smarter production, better technology, et cetera. In terms of the trade and what we're looking for this fall, other clients, I think, inflationary measures, borrowing, et cetera, is going to matter. But one of the other things Minister Freeland signaled this week is that in order that where the government will play a role is about trying to help companies build a stronger economy. And that's when you see in Ottawa, there was an investment this week. Nokia announced a new R&D center. So there was provincial government investment, federal government investment, in addition to the Nokia investment. And recognizing that we're competing as a country and in jurisdictions with California, the Californias of the world. So to bring in dollars and these magnets for other spin-off industries, government has to play a role and invest. And we're seeing that in the electric vehicle and the battery side of things. So that's where I think you're going to see opportunities for clients, whether it's critical minerals and the impact that has in the mining sector overall from a regulatory perspective. That's what the government has to do. They have to make it easier and smoother for business to take place in the country, the kind of business that generates jobs, the kind of business that generates income, revenues, both for government, but revenues for salaries for people in their homes. That's where I think you're going to see the most movement in government and the most opportunity this fall.
Neil, I'll leave the last question to you then. So what do you see over the next month or so in terms of how the government is going to build the economy but at least while still, restraining in terms of the spending?
Well, the fall, we've talked a bit about the fall economic statement. A lot will hinge on what comes out in the fall economic statement. A tried and true mantra of this government has been we can balance the economy and the environment. They've done a lot of work to bolster their bona fides on the environmental side. It'll be interesting to see what they do in the fall economic statement and again in the budget next spring to help the economy. Ms. Freeland has been out recently, being the Minister of Everything, talking about natural resource policy, talking about industrial policy, talking about foreign policy, talking about defense policy, and talking about financial policy. And she's made a lot of pronouncements that sound good to Canadians who run businesses. There's a lot of businesses here who thought this government wasn't on their side. Domestic businesses are a lot, we were founded on, beaver pelts. Now we've become an extractive sector and a fintech sector, dominant economy. The fintech just kind of takes care of itself, I would say. They might not agree with that, but the extractive sector has really been hit hard by this government, and it would be nice to see this government open up that financial stream and help the economic growth of this country. And we'll see that. Hopefully, we'll see that in the fall economic statement.
Well, that'll be the next thing we're keeping an eye on for sure. Susan, Neil, and Mike, thank you very much for this great discussion as always. Have a great weekend. And to you, our viewers, thank you for watching. We'll see you soon when the fall economic statement comes out. Take care.
Wishing everybody lots of blue sky this weekend.
Yes.
Blue Sky Strategy Group is one of Canada's leading public affairs firms. For government relations, lobbying, and strategic communications advice across Canada, visit us at blueskystrategygroup.com. Blue Sky Strategy Group is a proud member of the Global Communications Alliance.